Transitioning from herd to harvester consciousness requires developing specific capabilities that the farm system actively discourages. These capabilities must be cultivated deliberately and practiced consistently because they go against both your conditioning and the social pressures that maintain herd consciousness. The foundation of harvester consciousness is strategic thinking, the ability to analyze systems, predict outcomes, and position yourself advantageously relative to forces that you cannot directly control. Strategic thinking requires developing what military analysts call situational awareness, understanding not just what is happening, but why it's happening, who benefits from it happening, and how current trends are likely to evolve. This awareness begins with what intelligence professionals call source diversification, getting information from multiple perspectives rather than relying on processed narratives designed for mass consumption. The harvester actively seeks primary sources, contradictory viewpoints, and information channels that serve different audiences with different interests. For economic information, this might mean reading financial reports rather than news stories about those reports, studying government data rather than media interpretations of that data, and following the investment behaviors of successful investors rather than listening to their public statements about markets. For political information, it means understanding the actual incentives that drive political behavior rather than accepting the stated motivations that politicians provide for public consumption. It means studying policy outcomes rather than policy intentions and following money flows rather than rhetorical positions. For social information, it means observing revealed preferences rather than stated preferences, what people actually do rather than what they say they value. It means understanding demographic trends, cultural shifts, and psychological patterns that influence collective behavior regardless of what individuals believe about their own motivations. The harvester also develops what economists call opportunity cost thinking, the ability to evaluate choices not just based on their direct benefits, but based on what alternatives those choices eliminate. Every hour spent, every dollar invested, every relationship maintained represents opportunities not pursued and resources not available for other purposes. This opportunity cost analysis prevents the harvester from falling into sunk cost fallacies, continuing ineffective strategies because of past investments, rather than changing strategies based on current circumstances and future opportunities. The harvester remains willing to abandon approaches that are not producing desired results, regardless of how much has already been invested in those approaches. Strategic thinking also requires what military planners call scenario development, imagining multiple possible futures and preparing for various contingencies, rather than assuming that current trends will continue unchanged. The harvester doesn't just plan for the most likely outcomes, but prepares for scenarios that would catch the herd unprepared. This scenario planning includes developing multiple income streams, maintaining liquid resources for opportunities, building skills that remain valuable across different economic conditions, and cultivating relationships that provide access to information and opportunities that are not available to the general public. Perhaps most importantly, the harvester develops conscious selfishness, the deliberate prioritization of their own authentic interests over social expectations, others' comfort, and conventional moral frameworks. This is not the petty selfishness of taking without creating value, but the strategic selfishness of ensuring that your own development and position are secure before extending resources to others. Conscious selfishness requires overcoming the conditioning that teaches people to feel guilty about pursuing their own interests effectively. The herd member, has been trained to believe that focusing on their own advancement is morally suspect, and that truly good people sacrifice their interests for others. The harvester recognizes this belief as a control mechanism designed to keep capable people focused on serving others rather than developing their own power. This doesn't mean becoming cruel or indifferent to others' welfare. It means recognizing that your ability to contribute positively to others depends on your own strength, capabilities, and position. You cannot effectively help others if you haven't first developed the resources and capabilities that make helping others possible without depleting yourself. Conscious selfishness also means being selective about relationships, commitments, and obligations. The harvester maintains relationships that are mutually beneficial and energizing while ending relationships that are draining or one-sided. They commit to projects and causes that align with their authentic interests and capabilities while declining opportunities that would divert resources from higher priorities. This selectivity often creates social friction because others have been conditioned to expect universal availability and unlimited accommodation. The harvester must develop comfort with others' disapproval and disappointment as the price of maintaining focus on their authentic priorities. The harvester also cultivates what psychologists call emotional regulation, the ability to make decisions based on rational analysis rather than emotional reactions. This includes immunity to the fear-based appeals that motivate much herd behavior, resistance to social pressure that encourages conformity over authenticity, and the ability to maintain long-term focus despite short-term discomfort or uncertainty. Emotional regulation doesn't mean suppressing emotions, but rather using emotions as information while making decisions based on strategic analysis. Fear provides information about potential risks that should be evaluated, but it shouldn't automatically determine choices. Social pressure provides information about group dynamics that should be understood, but it shouldn't override individual judgment about what serves authentic development. The toolkit also includes what entrepreneurs call value creation thinking, the ability to identify problems that others will pay to have solved and develop solutions that create genuine value for those who use them. This thinking focuses on contribution rather than extraction, on building capabilities that serve markets rather than on finding ways to capture value without creating it. Value creation thinking requires understanding others' genuine needs and preferences rather than projecting your own assumptions onto them. It means developing solutions that actually work rather than solutions that sound good or feel virtuous to create. It means building sustainable competitive advantages rather than seeking quick profits that cannot be maintained. Finally, the harvester develops what military strategists call operational security, the practice of controlling information about your plans, capabilities, and vulnerabilities to prevent others from interfering with your strategic objectives. This includes discretion about your actual goals and methods, selectivity about who receives detailed information about your activities, and the ability to present different versions of yourself to different audiences based on what those presentations accomplish. Operational security is not deception for its own sake, but strategic information management that prevents others from using your openness against your interests. The herd member shares everything with everyone and wonders why their plans are often sabotaged or their opportunities are captured by others who were listening. We have reached the end of our journey through the farm, and you now face the most important recognition of your life. There is no neutral ground. You cannot remain unconscious of the choice between herd and harvester once you understand how the system actually operates. You cannot return to comfortable ignorance about your position on the farm now that you've seen the fences, the feeding systems, and the harvesting schedules. Every day from this moment forward, every decision you make, every relationship you maintain, every opportunity you pursue or avoid will be determined by which side of this fundamental divide you choose to inhabit. You will either live as managed livestock, comfortable in your pasture, but ultimately serving purposes that are not your own, or you will develop the capabilities and consciousness necessary to become one of those who manage rather than are managed. This choice cannot be made half-heartedly. You cannot be a part-time harvester or a weekend independent thinker. The farm system is designed to recapture those who try to escape without fully committing to a different way of being. The social pressures, economic dependencies, and psychological comforts that maintain herd consciousness operate continuously and will pull you back toward managed status, unless you develop the strength and clarity to resist them permanently. If you choose to remain herd, do so consciously and completely. Accept that your role is to be managed by others who understand systems that you prefer not to understand. Accept that your security depends on the goodwill and competence of those who make decisions that affect your life, but that you do not control. Accept that your meaning and purpose will come from serving functions that others have designed, rather than from pursuing visions that emerge from your authentic nature. There is no shame in this choice if it is genuinely yours. Many people are happier and more fulfilled as managed members of effective systems than they would be as independent agents responsible for their own outcomes. The key is making this choice based on honest assessment of your capabilities, values, and circumstances, rather than accepting it unconsciously because you've never seriously considered alternatives. But if you choose the harvester path, understand what you are accepting. You are choosing to develop capabilities that most people do not develop, to take responsibility that most people avoid, and to live with uncertainty that most people cannot tolerate. You are choosing to become someone who creates systems rather than someone who is managed by systems. This path requires developing strategic thinking that sees through social narratives to underlying power dynamics. It demands emotional strength that can withstand social disapproval when your choices conflict with others' expectations. It necessitates practical capabilities that make you valuable to others rather than dependent on others' charity or institutional support. Most challenging of all, it requires accepting that your success may come at the expense of maintaining comfortable relationships with people who remain committed to herd consciousness. Your development of harvester awareness will make you increasingly unable to pretend that you see the world the way they see it, and they may interpret your honesty as betrayal or your independence as abandonment. The harvester path is not morally superior to the herd path. It is strategically superior for those who value freedom, authentic self-expression, and the ability to shape circumstances rather than merely adapt to them. But it is more difficult, more lonely, and more demanding than the managed life that institutions offer to those willing to accept their assignments. You know the truth now. You understand how the system works, why it works that way, and what your options are within it. You cannot claim ignorance, and you cannot claim that you had no choice. You are either herd or harvester, the pasture or the power, the managed or the managing. What will you choose to become? The world is a farm, and it has always been a farm. Human societies organize themselves around the management of many by few, because this arrangement serves certain psychological needs and produces certain economic efficiencies. Understanding this reality is the beginning of wisdom about how to position yourself within it. But remember, farms exist to serve the farmers, not the livestock. The question you must answer is not whether this arrangement is good or evil, fair or unfair, natural or artificial. The question is whether you will spend your life as an asset managed by others for their benefit, or whether you will develop the capabilities necessary to become someone who manages assets, including human assets, for your own purposes and according to your own vision. The choice is binary, and it is urgent. Every day you postpone this decision is a day spent allowing circumstances and other people's choices to determine your position on the farm. Every week you spend hoping that you can somehow avoid choosing is a week that the choosing is being done for you by forces that do not have your interests as their priority. Perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the farm system is that most of the herd genuinely prefers their position to the alternative. This is not ignorance or false consciousness. It's a rational psychological response to the actual costs and benefits of different life strategies. Understanding why people choose herd consciousness is essential for understanding why so few ever transition to harvester awareness. The primary benefit of herd consciousness is the elimination of existential anxiety. When you accept that authorities know what's best, that following prescribed paths leads to positive outcomes, that belonging to institutions provides security, you no longer have to face the terrifying reality that you are ultimately responsible for creating meaning, security, and success in your own life. This anxiety elimination is so psychologically valuable that most people will sacrifice significant autonomy, opportunity, and authentic self-expression to maintain it. The comfort of knowing your role, following established procedures, and being part of something larger than yourself provides psychological rewards that many people find more satisfying than the uncertainty and responsibility that come with independent thinking and action. The herd member doesn't have to wonder whether they're making the right choices because the choices have been made for them by experts, institutions, and social expectations. They don't have to develop independent judgment because they can rely on authorities' judgment. They don't have to take responsibility for outcomes because they're following instructions from people who are supposed to know better. This delegation of responsibility creates what psychologists call learned helplessness, a condition where people become psychologically dependent on external guidance, even in areas where they're capable of independent judgment and action. The herd member genuinely feels incapable of making major life decisions without extensive consultation with experts, authorities, and social support systems. But this learned helplessness serves a protective function. It prevents them from having to confront their actual capabilities and limitations. As long as they're following others' guidance, they never have to discover what they're truly capable of achieving or what they might fail to achieve if they relied on their own resources and judgment. The social benefits of herd consciousness are also substantial. Belonging to the herd provides identity, community, and social approval that can be difficult to replace through independent achievement. The person who shares common beliefs, values, and lifestyle patterns with their community experiences social connection and support that the independent person often lacks. This social integration is particularly powerful because humans evolved as social creatures who relied on group membership for survival. The psychological and emotional rewards of belonging are deeply embedded in our neural architecture. Choosing independence over belonging requires overcoming millions of years of evolutionary programming that associates group rejection with death. The herd member also benefits from what economists call risk pooling, sharing risks with others rather than bearing them individually. Employment provides income stability that self-employment lacks. Insurance systems provide protection that individual savings might not cover. Social safety nets provide backup plans that individual preparation might not anticipate. These risk-pooling benefits are real and substantial. The person who chooses independence gives up these collective protections and must develop individual capabilities and resources to manage risks that the herd handles through institutional arrangements. This requires higher levels of skill, preparation, and psychological resilience than many people possess or want to develop. The moral dimensions of herd consciousness also provide significant psychological benefits. The herd member can feel virtuous about following rules, supporting authorities, and contributing to collective welfare without having to wrestle with the complex moral ambiguities that independent decision-making requires. When you make your own choices based on your own judgment, you must take moral responsibility for the outcomes. When you follow institutional guidance and social expectations, you can share moral responsibility with the institutions and communities that provided that guidance. If outcomes are negative, you are following expert advice. If outcomes are positive, you are being a responsible person. This moral comfort is particularly valuable for people who have strong needs for ethical clarity. The independent person must develop their own moral framework and live with the uncertainty and responsibility that such independence requires. The herd member can adopt established moral frameworks and feel confident about their ethical standing without having to develop independent moral judgment. The cognitive benefits of herd consciousness include the elimination of decision fatigue and information overload. Modern life presents individuals with an overwhelming number of choices and an impossible amount of information to process. The herd member can reduce this complexity by accepting social defaults for most decisions and relying on trusted authorities for information filtering and interpretation. This cognitive simplification allows the herd member to focus their mental energy on a limited number of areas rather than trying to develop expertise across the full range of knowledge required for completely independent living. They can specialize in their professional area while relying on others for financial planning, health decisions, political opinions, and lifestyle choices. But perhaps the most powerful psychological benefit of herd consciousness is the protection it provides against what philosophers call nihilistic despair, the potentially overwhelming recognition that existence has no inherent meaning or purpose, and that all significance must be created through individual will and action. The herd member can find meaning through participating in larger systems, serving institutional purposes, and contributing to collective goals without having to create personal meaning from nothing. They can feel that their life matters because they're part of something important, rather than having to make their life matter through their individual achievements and self-creation. This existential comfort explains why many intelligent, educated, and capable people choose to remain in herd consciousness even when they clearly understand the costs. They're not failing to see alternatives. They're choosing known benefits over unknown possibilities, collective meaning over individual responsibility, shared risks over personal independence. The transition from herd to harvester consciousness requires not just understanding these psychological benefits, but being willing to give them up in exchange for something that may be more valuable, but is certainly less comfortable. This willingness requires a particular type of psychological makeup and life circumstances that not everyone possesses or experiences. Understanding this psychology prevents the harvester from developing contempt for the herd or frustration with their choices. The herd's decision to remain managed is often rational, given their values, capabilities, and circumstances. The harvester's role is not to convert the herd, but to understand their psychology well enough to predict their behavior and position advantageously in relation to that behavior. To understand your position on the farm, you must first understand how farm systems actually function. Every effective farm, whether it manages cattle or humans, operates according to the same basic principles, providing just enough comfort and security to prevent rebellion while extracting maximum value from the managed population. The human farm system is far more sophisticated than its agricultural counterpart because humans are more intelligent and therefore require more subtle forms of management. Direct force is expensive and creates resistance. The most efficient human farms operate through what political scientists call manufactured consent, creating conditions where the herd genuinely believes that serving the system's interests is the same as serving their own interests. This manufacturing process begins in childhood through what educators call socialization, but what is actually systematic conditioning to accept farm consciousness as natural reality. Children learn to sit in rows, follow schedules, respond to bells, seek approval from authorities, and compete with peers for limited rewards. They're taught that this environment prepares them for real life, but actually it prepares them for a lifetime of accepting institutional control as normal and necessary. The educational system doesn't primarily exist to develop children's authentic capabilities or to prepare them for self-directed success. It exists to produce adults who are comfortable being managed, who associate security with institutional membership, and who measure their worth by external validation rather than internal development. Notice what schools reward and what they discourage. They reward compliance, conformity, and the ability to reproduce approved information. They discourage independent thinking, questioning authority, and developing capabilities outside the prescribed curriculum. Students learn that success comes from figuring out what authorities want and providing it rather than from developing their own vision and capabilities. This early conditioning creates adults who instinctively seek employment rather than creating their own enterprises, who look to experts rather than developing their own expertise, and who expect institutions to solve problems rather than developing their own problem-solving capabilities. The employment system extends this conditioning into adult life. Most jobs are structured to maintain dependency rather than to develop independence. Employees are given specific tasks within larger systems that they don't understand or control. They're rewarded for specialization that makes them valuable to their current employer, but not necessarily valuable in general markets. The employee learns to associate security with their position within the organization rather than with their own capabilities. They develop skills that are primarily valuable within their current institutional context, rather than skills that would make them independently capable. They become dependent on the organization for not just income but for identity, social connection, and sense of purpose. This employment dependency is reinforced through benefits systems that make leaving the organization costly, promotion structures that reward longevity over performance, and social environments that make work relationships central to personal identity. The employee doesn't just work for the organization, they become psychologically integrated into it in ways that make independence seem risky and unnatural. The financial system further reinforces farm consciousness through debt structures that require predictable income streams to maintain. The person with mortgage payments, car loans, credit card debt, and other fixed obligations cannot take risks that might interrupt their income flow. They become locked into whatever employment arrangements are necessary to service their debts, regardless of whether those arrangements serve their authentic development. This debt dependency is often created through social pressure to maintain lifestyle standards that require leverage to achieve. The person is encouraged to buy houses, cars, and other assets that they cannot afford without debt, then must maintain employment that services that debt, creating a cycle of dependency that can persist for decades. The media system manages information flow to ensure that the herd receives narratives that support farm consciousness, rather than information that would enable independent understanding of how systems actually work. News focuses on events rather than patterns, symptoms rather than causes, emotional reactions rather than strategic analysis. The herd member consumes hours of media daily, while becoming less informed about the factors that actually influence their circumstances. They know what they're supposed to think about current events, but don't understand the economic, political, and social forces that create those events. They develop strong opinions about complex issues while lacking the information necessary to make informed decisions about their own lives. This information management creates what intelligence analysts call noise versus signal problems. The herd is overwhelmed with information that feels important but doesn't enable effective decision-making, while being deprived of information that would actually help them understand and navigate their circumstances. The political system completes the farm's control structure by creating the illusion of participation in decision-making, while ensuring that available choices don't threaten the fundamental arrangements that maintain the farm. Elections become competitions between different approaches to managing the same basic system, rather than opportunities to question whether the system serves the population's interests. The herd member feels empowered by participating in political processes while remaining powerless to influence the policies that most directly affect their daily lives. They can vote for representatives who promise various forms of farm management, but cannot vote to opt out of the farm system itself. This political participation also serves to legitimize the system's authority. The person who votes has consented to be governed by whoever wins the election. They've participated in the process and therefore have an obligation to accept the results. They become complicit in their own management while feeling that they've exercised their freedom. The entire farm system operates through what economists call principal-agent problems, situations where the people making decisions, agents, have different interests from the people affected by those decisions, principals. The herd member trusts that their agents, employers, politicians, experts, institutions are acting in their interests, while those agents are actually acting in their own interests or in the interests of their clients. Understanding these principal-agent problems is crucial for recognizing your position on the farm. When you rely on others to make decisions that affect your life, you must ask, what are their actual incentives? What do they gain from various outcomes? How do their interests align or conflict with your interests? The harvester learns to identify and navigate these principal-agent relationships strategically. They assume that agents will act according to their own incentives and position themselves accordingly. They seek to become principals themselves, people who make decisions that others implement, rather than people who implement decisions that others make. While the herd sleeps in the comfort of consensus reality, the harvester operates from an entirely different understanding of how the world actually functions. The harvester sees systems where the herd sees nature, recognizes patterns where the herd sees randomness, and identifies opportunities where the herd sees limitations. The fundamental difference between harvester and herd is not intelligence or education, it's perspective. The herd looks at social arrangements and sees the way things are. The harvester looks at the same arrangements and sees systems created by people that can be understood, influenced, and exploited by people who understand how they actually work. The harvester recognizes that every social institution, every cultural norm, every economic system exists because it serves someone's interests. The question is not whether these systems are good or bad, fair or unfair, moral or immoral. The question is, whose interests do these systems serve, and how can I position myself to benefit from them rather than be consumed by them? This perspective allows the harvester to see opportunities that are invisible to herd consciousness. When the herd sees a crisis, the harvester sees a chance to acquire assets at reduced prices from panicked sellers. When the herd sees uncertainty, the harvester sees inefficiencies that can be exploited by those who understand what's actually happening. When the herd sees problems, the harvester sees markets for solutions. The harvester understands that emotional manipulation is the primary tool for managing the herd, and therefore develops immunity to the emotional appeals that control herd behavior. When authorities appeal to fear, patriotism, compassion, or outrage to motivate certain behaviors, the harvester asks, what behaviors are being encouraged? Who benefits from these behaviors? And how can I position myself advantageously while others respond emotionally? This emotional immunity allows the harvester to make decisions based on practical analysis rather than psychological manipulation. When everyone else is buying, the harvester considers selling. When everyone else is afraid, the harvester looks for opportunities. When everyone else is following the crowd, the harvester studies where the crowd is going and positions themselves at the destination. The harvester develops what we might call systems thinking, the ability to see how different parts of social, economic, and political systems interact to produce predictable outcomes. While the herd focuses on individual events and emotional reactions to those events, the harvester focuses on the patterns and incentive structures that create those events. For example, the herd member sees a news story about economic inequality and has an emotional response about fairness. The harvester sees the same story and analyzes what policies create inequality, who benefits from these policies, what narrative is being promoted about inequality, who profits from the proposed solutions. How can I position myself to benefit regardless of which policies are implemented? This systems thinking extends to personal relationships, career development, and life planning. The harvester doesn't just react to circumstances. They study the forces that create circumstances and position themselves where those forces will work in their favor rather than against them. The harvester also understands that knowledge is not democratically distributed. The information that reaches the general public is often filtered, delayed, or specifically designed to encourage certain responses from the herd. Real information, the kind that enables accurate prediction and strategic positioning, flows through different channels and requires different methods to acquire. This creates what economists call information asymmetry, situations where some participants have significantly better information than others. The harvester actively cultivates access to superior information through direct relationships with decision makers, careful analysis of primary sources, and pattern recognition developed through experience rather than through consuming processed narratives designed for mass consumption. The harvester's relationship with authority is fundamentally different from the herd's. While the herd seeks authorities who will take care of them, the harvester studies authorities to understand their motivations, limitations, and predictable behaviors. The harvester doesn't want to be governed well. They want to understand how governance actually works so they can navigate and influence it effectively. This requires what Machiavelli called effectual truth, focusing on how things actually work rather than how they're supposed to work or how you wish they worked. The harvester is not interested in moral judgments about power structures. They're interested in accurate understanding of power structures so they can operate within them successfully. The harvester also recognizes that most people want to remain herd because herd consciousness provides psychological benefits that many people value more than freedom or power. The comfort of belonging, the security of following prescribed paths, the moral superiority of following rules, these benefits are real, and the harvester doesn't expect everyone to abandon them. This recognition leads to what might seem like cynicism but is actually strategic clarity. The harvester expects most people to behave according to herd psychology and positions themselves accordingly. They don't try to educate the herd or convert them to harvester consciousness. They simply factor herd behavior into their strategic calculations. The harvester understands that value is created by solving problems and meeting needs, and that the greatest opportunities exist where problems are largest and solutions are scarcest. While the herd complains about problems and waits for others to solve them, the harvester develops capabilities to solve those problems profitably. This problem-solving focus creates what economists call comparative advantage. The harvester becomes exceptionally good at specific things that others either cannot do or will not do. This specialization creates opportunities for exchange, where the harvester provides high-value services in return for resources, access, or positioning that serves their larger strategic goals. Perhaps most importantly, the harvester maintains what Jung called individuation, the ongoing process of becoming who they authentically are, rather than who others expect them to be. This authenticity provides psychological strength and clarity that allows them to make decisions based on their genuine assessment of what serves their development rather than what maintains others' approval. The herd is not defined by intelligence, education, or social status. Some of the most highly educated, successful, and intelligent people you know are deeply embedded in herd consciousness. The herd is defined by something far more fundamental: the unconscious acceptance of external authority as the source of truth, meaning, and direction in life. Watch how the herd moves through the world, and you'll see the same patterns everywhere. They follow established paths without questioning where those paths lead. They accept expert opinions without examining the experts' motivations. They adopt beliefs because those beliefs are socially acceptable, rather than because they've tested those beliefs against reality. The herd member wakes up each morning and checks their phone to see what they should think about the day's events. They consume news that tells them how to interpret reality rather than observing reality directly. They form opinions by absorbing the opinions of others rather than through independent analysis. They feel informed because they can repeat the current narratives, not because they understand the underlying dynamics. In their careers, herd members follow prescribed paths: go to school, get a degree, find a job, work for 40 years, retire. They rarely question whether this path serves their authentic interests or whether it primarily serves the interests of those who benefit from having a predictable supply of educated workers. They measure success by how well they conform to expectations, rather than by how effectively they achieve their genuine goals. The herd member seeks safety and consensus. If everyone else believes something, it must be true. If everyone else is doing something, it must be right. If everyone else accepts certain limitations, those limitations must be natural and inevitable. They mistake popularity for validity and conformity for wisdom. This consensus seeking creates what psychologists call diffusion of responsibility, the psychological tendency to feel less responsible for outcomes when part of a group. The herd member doesn't feel accountable for the consequences of their beliefs or actions because they're just doing what everyone else does. They're following expert guidance. They're being reasonable and responsible. But this diffusion of responsibility is precisely what makes them livestock. They've abdicated their individual agency in exchange for the comfort of belonging to something larger than themselves. They've traded personal responsibility for group identity, independent thinking for social approval, authentic choice for prescribed options. The herd member's entire identity becomes wrapped up in their assigned role within the farm system. They're proud to be a productive member of society, a responsible citizen, a team player. They derive their sense of worth from how well they perform the functions that others have defined for them, rather than from their own assessment of their growth, achievement, and authentic contribution. This external identity makes them predictable and manageable. The harvester knows that herd members will respond to certain stimuli in certain ways, show them a crisis, and they'll demand that authorities solve it, appeal to their desire to be good people, and they'll support policies that make them feel virtuous regardless of those policies' practical effects, threaten their group identity, and they'll defend the group even when the group doesn't serve their individual interests. The herd member experiences what they call stress and anxiety, without recognizing that these feelings often result from the constant contradiction between their authentic nature and their assigned role. They feel unfulfilled in their work but continue working because work is what responsible people do. They feel disconnected in their relationships, but maintain those relationships because belonging is what normal people do. They seek therapy to help them better adjust to circumstances that may be fundamentally unsuited to their authentic development. They take medication to manage symptoms that may be their psyche's natural response to living an inauthentic life. They pursue stress management techniques to help them tolerate situations that they might be better off changing or leaving entirely. The herd member's relationship with authority is fundamentally childlike. They want to be taken care of by benevolent leaders who will solve their problems, protect them from dangers, and make decisions that they don't want to make themselves. When authorities fail them, they don't question the concept of authority. They simply seek better authorities. They vote for politicians who promise to give them what they want, rather than politicians who will leave them free to pursue what they want themselves. They seek employers who will provide security rather than developing capabilities that would make them secure regardless of their employment status. They want relationship partners who will meet their needs rather than developing the completeness that would make them attractive to partners who can enhance their already fulfilling lives. This dependency on external authority keeps them in a perpetual state of psychological adolescence. They never develop the internal compass necessary for independent navigation through life's challenges. They never learn to trust their own judgment because they've never been encouraged to develop reliable judgment. They never discover their authentic capabilities because they've never been required to rely on those capabilities for their survival and success. The tragedy of herd consciousness is that it often produces decent, well-meaning people who genuinely want to contribute positively to the world, but their good intentions are channeled through systems and institutions that may not serve their authentic interests or the genuine welfare of others. They become unwitting participants in their own limitation and exploitation while believing they're being responsible and moral. You are livestock. The world is a farm, and has always been a farm. Every human society that has ever existed has organized itself around the same basic principle: a small group of harvesters managing a large group of herd. The only question that has ever mattered, the only question that matters for you right now, is which group you belong to. Tonight, over the next hour, we will strip away every comfortable illusion you've been fed about human society, individual freedom, and personal agency. You will discover how the farm operates, why it exists, and most importantly, how to recognize whether you are currently grazing in the pasture or holding the scythe. By the end of this exploration, you will understand that every aspect of your life, your education, your career, your relationships, your beliefs, your dreams, has been shaped by your position on the farm. You will see that the choice facing you is not whether to participate in the farm system, but whether to remain unconsciously herd or to consciously become harvester. This is not a comfortable journey. We will examine truths that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. But for those brave enough to see clearly, this knowledge becomes the foundation for everything else. The key to understanding not just how the world works, but how to work the world. The world is not what you were told it is. Every institution that shaped your understanding, every authority figure that guided your beliefs, every comfortable assumption about freedom and choice that you've carried through life, all of it has been carefully constructed to hide the most fundamental truth about human existence. You are not a free agent navigating an open world of infinite possibilities. You are not the hero of your own story, making independent decisions that shape your destiny. You are not even a player in the game of life.